Ari, Alabama is headed to Knoxville for the first time since that crazy game 2 years ago when they sunk the goalpost in the Tennessee River. This is a huge matchup for both teams. Like we talked about last week with LSU and Ole Miss, it feels like an elimination game not because the loser's out of the playoff race, but because the loser's remaining schedule is so hard that it seems impossible to believe that they would run the table after losing this game. So it is a big, high-stakes game. There'll be a huge crowd. Very interesting quarterback matchup. We've already talked about Nico Iamaleava. Let's talk about Jalen Milroe, Alabama's quarterback in this game, because he is going to have a big game, because I'm a little worried about Alabama's defense. I feel like this is forcing Jalen Milroe to have even bigger games for them to win.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because Jalen Milroe, after the Georgia win, was on a lot of Heisman top 3 projections. And obviously, when you lose the game that they lost to Vanderbilt, and then, of course, almost losing to South Carolina over the weekend, people sour on that notion. But I still think that he's one of the most electric players in college football. Now, which one you get obviously goes a long way in determining whether or not Alabama is going to win a football game. But going on the road to what might be the loudest stadium in college football this weekend, it's a time for him to show up and put his team in a position to potentially win this football game.
Well, let's look at Milroe and his prize picks projections, because I think those are very telling. And if you've not been playing prize picks, what are you doing? Download the app, use the code Staples, play $5, get $50 instantly. What you're doing is playing squares. So you've got a player, he's attached to a statistical category. Could be a college football player, NFL player, Major League Baseball, darts, esports, you name it. They got it all. But we're talking college football here, and we're talking Jalen Milroe. And the one I want to look at is 0.5 interceptions. Do you think he will throw for more than or less than 0.5 interceptions? Basically, is asking you, do you think he will throw an interception? So Jalen Milroe has thrown a pick in each of the last 3 games. He threw 2 against South Carolina. This is a team in Tennessee that will get after you. James Pierce Jr. is one of the best pass rushers in the country. They can force quarterbacks to make mistakes. You saw DJ Lagway, the Florida quarterback, come in. And remember, Graham Mertz got hurt. Lagway had played some of the game already, but then Graham Mertz gets hurt. You realize it's my show. What's the first thing he does? Throws a pick. This defense will confuse you into throwing picks.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he threw 0 picks in the non-conference and has thrown at least 1 pick in every SEC game that he's played. And now you're going on the road into an environment that's going to cause you to probably, struggle to communicate with your team as effectively as usual. You're going to be pressured by the best pass rusher in the country, and Tennessee is kind of designed to force quarterbacks into mistakes. So if I had to, choose a side on this one, I think it would be more than a pick.
And Tennessee also going to play without their starting middle linebacker, Keenan Peely, who's out for the season. Watch that with a couple of different squares with Milroe. He's got the 281.5 pass plus rushing yards. I think that's really interesting because Milroe is the kind of guy that if he has a big day on the ground, he can put a huge number up rushing, and then he doesn't have to throw for as much to make that work and to make Alabama's offense go. The other one that's really interesting is 16.5 yards longest rush. I almost feel like that's an automatic more than.
Well, 16 longest rush is interesting because in the 6 games that he's played, he's only gone, or he went over that 4 times. It's his longest rush in those 6 games. So He does it more often than not. Now, obviously you have sack yardage in college football taking your rushing yardage away, but he has only gotten to 75 yards rushing 3 times this year. So that's a pretty high mark for a quarterback, but it's not guaranteed that he's going to run all over the field because
but the 16.5 one for me, the reason I think 16.5 is an almost automatic more than is because there's going to be a moment where he's being chased by someone scary and he's going to run away from them. And Jalen Milroe is one of the few athletes in the country that when they're being chased by someone scary can run for a long way.
And when you're running away from somebody scary, if you make one other person miss, it could be 50 yards. That's kind of how that works. And there's nobody in college football that you're probably more confident that he could do it. The longest rush in all of the games, South Carolina 27, Vanderbilt 14, Georgia 36, which is probably more in line with what you're thinking, right? I know exactly what run that was in that game. Wisconsin, he had a 26-yard rush. USF, which was a weird game, was 14, and then in the opener against Western Kentucky, 40. So like he's done a pretty good job of breaking, contain, running away from scary people, and moving the chains on the ground.
Yeah, and look, I think the onus is more on Nico, Tennessee's quarterback, to play really well. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be fine. I think Jalen Milroe has the benefit of having the most dynamic playmaker in the game on his side in Ryan Williams. I think that makes a big difference. But I do wonder, because if Nico does play well, then you're getting into shootout territory. But the last 2 Tennessee games have been slogs. I think if this is a slog, Alabama's winning. Milroe's comfortable. He's hitting these numbers. Like it's not going to be a problem. It's only if Tennessee's offense decides to work again that he's really going to have to keep pace. But then again, I think if he has to keep pace, that's fine, because he's going to put up numbers.
Yeah, keeping pace is good in this game. If you're a more than guy, there's nothing harder than watching a really dynamic athlete when you hit the less than, and just having to like pray that he doesn't do something dynamic. Like that's
why like I don't think with like the single rush total or with receivers with the longest catch, like if you have somebody super dynamic, don't torture yourself with the less than on that. Like you're just asking to be tortured. Like, because Jalen Milroe at any moment can pop off for a 20-yard run.
Yeah, it reminds me of days where you would fade the Golden State Warriors point total and just have to sit there and watch Clay and Steph just drain threes in your face. It's just like, who wants to? It's not fun. So I like Jalen Milroe. I think this is a really big spot for him, not just in the Prize Picks numbers, but just in his general, reputation,
his evolution. Now, as someone who truly enjoyed that game 2 years ago, I wouldn't mind 52-48 or something like that as the final score in this game. I don't care who wins. So give me that same kind of shootout. Give me that level of shootout. I'm all for it.
Andy, when I was in college or, early in my 20s, if all my friends were out and I was getting pictures or texts and I wasn't there or I was out of town, like I would have really bad fear of missing out, really bad FOMO. But I do think that the worst FOMO that I've ever had in my entire life was not being at that Tennessee-Alabama game a few years ago. And we've brought it up quite a bit this week, obviously, because they're playing. And I've had to relive that FOMO like every single day. And I just cannot wait. And making the same mistake again of not being there this weekend. So, it's going to be a great game.
The problem is, do you go there? Do you go to Texas, Georgia? Like, there's so much. But
also, too, if Tennessee wins this game, I don't think that it's going to be as emotional as it was 2 years ago. That was such a breakthrough moment for them. Yeah.
I mean, Vandy's already beaten Alabama. It's not the same thing.
Yikes.